Hi, I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Rihanna, and welcome back to Fresh Off the Broke.
Fresh Off the Broke is about personal experiences growing up Asian American in a predominantly white community, Asian media, and Asian pop culture in general. Race has always been a sensitive topic. Every day there are debates over race. With our podcast, we intend to shed light on the experiences of first-generation Asian immigrants, not put them on a pedestal.
We understand that race isn't everything, but there should be an acknowledgement of people of color, the knowledge gap, and the racial divide that will ideally be broken. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the episode. Today we will be discussing the lack of Asian history in the Canadian education system. First of all, by the lack of Asian history in the Canadian education system, we mean like the lack of, well, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. Like, we don't really get taught about Asian history within our education system, with a few exceptions, but even then, those aren't very, like, they aren't really explained that well, you know?
Yeah, and the assignments that we do are just put there for the sake of doing it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you have any examples of, like, weird assignments that you were given in terms of Asian history?
Yeah, unfortunately. I was going to say fortunately, but that's not how it works. So back in 8th grade, I feel like we've mentioned 8th grade a couple of times in the podcast.
Have.
No reason. But in 8th grade, when we were doing history, or was it called social studies back then?
I think
was
so,
it still called social studies back in middle school?
Actually, I don't think so. I think it was history, and then in elementary it was social studies.
Huh. Okay, anyway, my teacher taught whatever she didn't like the way where it was almost as if she was forced to do these things. Like, you know how there's this meme, this is a little off topic, that Jimmy Fallon, he laughs like he's forced to, or else like he might die or something. Yeah. That's how my teacher approached any subject that she didn't like. Drama, we did one class, and I mean, I'm fine with that because I didn't like doing drama with my class. But whenever something came up that she had to teach and didn't want to, I felt her pain. Awful. So, when it came that we had to learn about Asian history, we basically just covered Chinese railroad workers in like the worst way possible.
Yeah.
I think we read one article together as a class, which, whatever. And then we had just the most insensitive, like, weird assignment ever. And what we had to do was write a letter in the point of view of a Chinese railroad worker that's trying to communicate to their family back home.
Yikes.
And this was like an unwritten thing, but you got bonus points if you like use a Chinese name or something. Because, yeah, I know. Because one guy in my class that was also Chinese, he helped this girl he liked. And oh my God. Basically, it's funny because you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But he wrote like a random Chinese name for her, and then when she got her letter back, there was a check mark next to the name. She got like a bonus point.
Wow.
Which, really?
I know.
And actually, that was basically how we got points. You got bonus marks, or well, you got a high mark when your letter included key points from the event. For example, like say someone was writing to their wife, they're saying, we did this today, and we found jade, which was a thing because I'll touch on this later, but during the construction of the the Canadian Pacific Railroad, also known as CPR, very weird. they found jade, and the white people were like, okay, it's rock. They didn't know that it was valuable at all. But the Chinese workers, they were freaking out because what the heck?
Yeah.
Hit a gold mine, I guess. And that was where you would get basically 80% of your points for writing that letter. You would have to mention things like that. And I mean, if we're talking about the reality of the Chinese railroad workers, it was not a party.
No.
People died climbing into like openings / holes because Asian people, if we're talking about statistically, they are shorter, like they're built smaller than white people. And that's another thing we're going to touch on later. But that was my experience. I hated it. I didn't even get a decent mark. And I was Chinese. Let that sink in for a second. Sorry, headphone user. Sorry.
That reminds me of, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's like this meme on the internet of someone had the same assignment. I don't know. It was probably just like right in the point of view of a Chinese immigrant, and they wrote it like in Chinese. I'm not sure which. Yeah, but like they failed because the teacher couldn't read it. But at the same time, it's like, shouldn't they have gotten full marks because it's 100% accurate to, some white kid writing like, today I did this, like stuff like that, Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's funny. Like, obviously, the teacher can't mark it, but at the same time, it's like, you have to give them points for that, at least.
Yeah. That was a horrible assignment, and I mean, I'm fine with it now. Not the assignment, the mark thing, but at the time, I was so offended. The heck?
Well, yeah. I mean, makes sense.
And going back to what you said about the person that actually wrote it in Chinese, I mean, isn't that the better thing to do?
Yeah.
And you could have just asked them to translate it for you.
I know.
Or run it through Google Translate. Don't they have those translators where you can take a picture of something and then?
Yeah.
Would have been funny if the teacher Google translated it, and then it turns out that they were cursing at them.
Yeah.
I'd love that.
Oh my God! Wait. Speaking of that, oh God, I can't remember if I've told this story. Doesn't really have to do with anything, but okay. So for my school, we had this. I don't even remember why we were doing it. Maybe it was like a spirit week, and it was, you just basically had to like do something for your culture, I guess.
Okay.
And mind you, so I was in the gifted program, and everyone in that class was basically like some sort of ethnic. The minority were the white kids, okay? But the rest of the school was like 99% white. And by white, I mean Greek. I'm sure you can relate. But yeah, so we did this thing where we had to like draw on a puzzle piece, and then they would stick all the puzzle pieces together, and it was like
I know what
yeah, that thing. So see, me being me, I was like, you know what? There's no Filipino kids in this school except for one guy in my class, and I'm gonna take this opportunity to leave an imprint on my school, okay? So I wrote the nastiest things in Filipino on these like little pieces of artwork. Obviously, I made them look really nice, and like I drew the flag, and it was all cutesy and whatever. But I wrote like the nastiest things in Tagalog, and no one knew what it meant. But in my English translation, I wrote, "I love my country," but really it said like, "You're," bleep this out, but it really said like "you're" or something like that. Okay, and I don't film this, but like it's hilarious because I visited my school like a year later, and they framed it and put it on the wall, and like that's like my grade 8 memorial of what I left behind at the school.
Oh my God.
So yeah, that happened. But in terms of education, well, I grew up my first, like my elementary school, well, I went to multiple elementary schools, but the first one I went to was near my area, which is a very, like, a lot of immigrants are here. So the school was also, like, the school in general was mostly immigrant children, right?
Okay.
But even then, like, all, like, there was no acknowledgement of the diversity in the school, you know, like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it wasn't addressing the elephant in the room. Like, even just like reading the books that we read, and like all the kids, some kids like just couldn't understand certain things in the books, and like I don't know how to explain it, but like, you know, stereotypical reading a book about like a nice little white family doing this and that, and then like none of us could relate because that's just not how our families worked, you know?
Yeah.
So it was just confusing sometimes, and all the kids were like what is this, like there were so many kids that sometimes like they wouldn't even speak English to each other. It was just their native language to each other, right?
Yeah.
Like it was that heavy populated with immigrants, but it wasn't acknowledged by the education system at all. So I don't know, it was weird.
God. Okay. I have a very small tangent about that, and it's less about the education system, but when I was like growing up, I was the only Chinese girl in my class,
Mm-hmm.
or the only Asian girl in my class, period. And whenever there was another Asian guy, especially if it was another Chinese guy, people just like expected us to be best friends, or they
Like,
would ship us or something. And
stop.
I mean, we did get along because you kind of all suck, but
Yeah.
but it was so weird because I remember in grade 3, just out of nowhere, my teacher asked me and this other Chinese guy to write our Chinese names on the board. Just like, no, there's no context to this. I can't give you context. There was no context. We just had to.
That's weird.
And then and then I remember the kids, some people were saying how like my name looked better, or like his name looked better, but you don't understand.
It's the
You know,
same kids that like wear like Japanese writing on their clothes for the aesthetic, you know?
oh God, that was just what I looking back, I still don't know why I had to do that.
That's so weird. What the hell?
We weren't learning about anything in relation to Chinese names. We were just, yo, get up and write your name on the board.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
This is kind of where the episode stemmed from, but have you ever had to do a family tree project?
Oh, those never worked out for me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think I've done maybe 2 now. There was one in elementary school and then one in high school, and both of them were just very bad. And I don't mean like poorly done. I just mean I had an awful experience
Yeah,
because all the other kids in my class, all the other white kids, they could go back all the way to, I don't know, maybe the 1800s,
yeah,
and they had a very detailed uh, project family tree with a bunch of pictures
yeah,
from then. And then I don't even really know who my great grandparents are.
yeah, same.
Like even my grandparents in general weren't like in my life for a very long time.
Mm.
Okay, I'm saying that as if all my grandparents are not here. At the time that we're recording this, both of my grandmothers are still here.
For me, I don't like my grandparents, none of my grandparents are alive. And I think the only grandparent that was alive while I was born was my dad's mom. So, and she like died after, like, I don't even know if I was 1 yet, and she died by then. So I have no idea what it's like to have grandparents. But like, that was especially weird for me because doing family tree projects, people are like, "Oh, like, what about your grandma?" I'm like, I don't know. Like, what? I
I
don't get.
literally don't know her name.
Yeah, and like, it was always like the white kids are like, "Oh yeah, I visited my great grandma the other day. She's turning like this," and I'm like, "Bro, my parents are like the age of your grandparents, so that's awkward."
Wow, you didn't have to come after. Never mind. Yeah,
That's
and
less of like, oh, sorry.
no, go on. You were talking first.
That was less of that's less of a Asian thing, I think. Even though both of us are kind of in the same position, like having older parents, I guess. But it seems to like, well, actually no, because I know a lot of white people also that have pretty old parents. But I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
What were you gonna say?
there was also the war. The
Oh
wars
yeah,
that
yeah,
happened.
true.
That wasn't the thing that I was gonna bring up yet. I was gonna say
Yeah.
I forget. Shoot.
We just
Hang on.
aren't on it today.
What? What are you talking about? No, you're right. We're a little. I think we're just a little confused today.
Yeah.
I have a thing to add.
Okay.
Despite the fact that my grandparents were around for longer than your grandparents,
Mhm.
a majority of them didn't really like me because they preferred my other cousins because they were boys, which is a whole other episode.
Yeah.
But that's just how it was. And my one of my grandmothers, she's in China right now, and so that there's a lack of communication there.
Mm.
But that's what I was gonna say. Going back to the wars thing, I mean, war affected the entire world,
Yeah.
right? But the thing is, when it comes to Asians, it's I mean, most Asian people I know, they don't really know their great grandparents at all because it's a hard concept to explain. But I don't know, when we're learning, like if you think about like the war that happened back then, like um Canada versus US. I mean, yes, there were deaths that happened, but like I don't know. I feel like it's not necessarily the same because like with Asia, you had all this colonization, just like killing people because you could.
Yeah.
That's the simplest way that I can put it without making this a 4-hour episode.
Yeah, if anything, like you can see in the family, especially in like Filipino family trees, I think it's just like a known inside joke that everyone just has like one or two white uncles from during the war when the Americans like had their bases set up in the Philippines. Um everyone has at least one white uncle from that time, and like your uncle and your auntie met because your auntie wanted to have work in Angeles City and
Oh God, stop.
Well, it's not. I'm not wrong though.
Conversation we had. No, yes, you are completely right, and this is something that needs to be brought up. I'm just thinking about the conversation we had.
I know.
When you talked to your mom, and then she told you,
no.
and then you broke down.
If you want to find out, background information on that, check out our infographic about sex tourism in the Philippines. And everything will make sense as to why it's so uncomfortable to talk about my aunties and meeting my uncles, my American uncles, back during the time of war. Anyways, yeah, I think it's just everyone has one auntie at least that has a white, American uncle that met. Okay, whatever. This is so awkward.
Are you guys okay, listeners? Because we're not.
But what's new?
Oh, God.
I mean, we're okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, in elementary school, and in high school, I didn't really have proper resources to do the family tree thing. But the 5th grade assignment, that was, in a literal sense, a family tree, because we actually had to draw out a family tree and then have information displayed about our parents, maybe our relatives, grandparents, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And not only was it hard for me to find information, my parents refused to give me information.
Yeah.
This is an entirely different issue. But I was yelled at just multiple times over this project because my parents refused to let me tell other people information about our family, even though all I had to do was give a name, maybe an occupation, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so you know what I ended up having to do? I had to make it seem like my grandparents forgot. If you looked at my family tree, aside from the illustration, if you look at the information part, a lot of it is just NA or
Yeah.
I just thinking back to that time. I don't want to think back to that time. And then for the high school project that we did, Rihanna and I were in the same class. We had to interview someone in our family that was alive during was it the 50s and 60s, and then it would be better if it was the 20s and 30s and stuff like that. Yeah. Needless to say, I made up. Well, I didn't make it up. I just did research on the internet.
Yeah.
Because one, I don't have anyone to talk to from the 20s. At least one that will want to talk to me. Oh my god, I remember a history teacher told us to ask our principal, our white principal.
Oh, yeah.
And because even if I did ask my parents, they do the same thing from before and yell at me. And I just don't want that.
Sometimes you don't need that. Like, it's just too much. Yeah, I think I had the same thing with
feel
you.
like we have 3 different episode topics in this one episode.
I know.
No, okay. Clarification. We actually do script our episodes. Clarification.
Yeah, just sometimes it doesn't come across that way.
Because we want this to sound like a pure conversation, you know?
Yeah.
Real. Do you want perfectly crafted lines? No.
Imagine if we did that. It'd be hell.
How is your experience, quote unquote, interviewing your family?
Well, I had basically the same experience as you, except it was more so, well, in case people don't know, I have a very bad memory.
I thought you were going to say something else.
No. But, that very bad memory comes from my mother. And interviewing her would take so long because she just didn't remember things, but like she would want to like give me answers, but she just did not remember anything, and she'd end up asking my dad, and my dad would just be like, what the hell, like don't ask, like what, like don't, whatever,
don't talk to me.
Exactly, basically. So I also ended up just making a bunch of research and BSing it, you know.
Yeah.
But also just like family trees in general, I would always have this dilemma of I didn't have grandparents, or like I didn't know the length of my family tree, but I knew the width, if you knew what I mean. Like the amount of aunties and uncles and cousins that I am like in contact with is crazy. Like it's, I think that from what I see in like media and stuff like that, like white people, they I guess some people have like close relationships to their cousins and stuff, but usually like second cousins or like that kind of stuff isn't really close, you know? But for me, like I'm really close to my second cousins, or like I guess technically the term is cousin once removed.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, like your cousin's children, or like I think one of my cousins is a grandparent. Like that in and of itself is just really confusing to me, and I'm the youngest out of all the cousins. So that's also part of the problem, but like it's just I could either I would cut that whole part out or my family tree would be huge. Like there would be I would go up to my grandparents and to me, but like in terms of side to side movement, it was just a whole page.
I feel like it would be like 10 pages for you.
Yeah.
At least that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, my dad, he has like 8 siblings that
Wait,
are
really?
yeah, like there's 9 of them. And the oldest sibling is like a great grandparent.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. So, and there's 8 of them, and I think all of them except for one has children. So, yeah. It's a little rough.
A little rough.
Also, did you ever get like made or not made fun of, but like seen as weird because you're close to like your cousins or like I guess what could be considered distant relatives?
When you say seen as weird, by who?
Like your white peers.
They definitely saw me as weird, but I doubt that it was because I was friends with my cousin.
Mood. I mean, yeah.
That's my answer. I don't think they knew I talked to my cousin, but I know they definitely thought I was weird. Oh, this is less related to a family tree project and more related to family trees in general.
Oh no.
But family trees are really complicated for I don't want to say Asian because I know it's just like a common thing for non-English speakers, but you have different names for every type of relative.
Oh yeah.
On this side of this age of
Yeah.
people that only speak English or only have to speak English have it so much easier in that realm.
Also,
Because grandmother, grandfather, great grandparent, great uncle, my cousin, my second cousin, my
not
aunt,
even though. Like you can just refer to them as their name, you know?
Oh, that's true. People do that. Yeah, people do that.
Let's see.
And then here, if I see someone in my family that's, I don't know, maybe like all the way, I don't want to say west, like you know how you said that you had like a wide family tree. If I saw maybe like a third cousin, I don't even know if I would know how to refer to them.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would address them.
There's a lot. Confusing.
Okay. Now that we're done with our rant about our lack of education, we are about to educate you. We're about to do a little educational session about Asian Canadian history, specifically Chinese Canadian history and Filipino-Canadian history because
okay, but my part is going to be
Chinese.
very short.
If you want, you can go first since yours is short.
Because, listen, I know that there's definitely a lot more that is not being, like, talked about. Because in terms of, like, a Filipino-American history, there's a lot. Like, there's a lot of racism. Um, But again, we are not American, we are Canadian. And I wasn't really taught anything in school about Filipino immigrants and like that stuff, even though in our area, Filipinos are like the most abundant immigrant population.
Mm-hmm.
I think even in just, let me search this up. Top Canada immigrant. Okay, so top 10 countries immigrant to Canada. Number 1 is India, number 2 is China, and number 3 is the Philippines. So we're in the top 3. I don't know why I didn't really learn about this stuff, but there's a complete lack of it. And on canada.ca,
Oh my god.
not a plug, but there's a section that says Canadians of Filipino origin, and it's literally not even 2 paragraphs long. So I guess
You
I
want
could
to
just
excerpt
read
from
it.
it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna do that? Okay, never mind.
It says people from the Philippines began immigrating to Canada in 1931. However, it was not until the 1990s that immigration increased as more Filipinos came to fill gaps in the Canadian labor market. Over the last few decades, Canadians of Filipino origin have established themselves as integral members of urban centers like Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Montreal, Calgary, and Edmonton. Currently, there are a variety of Filipino associations across Canada that foster and participate in community festivals and civic celebrations. Canadians of Filipino origin have also established newspapers, magazines, as well as TV and radio stations, which, I mean, I feel like that part was just filler because they didn't have anything else to say on the history.
You could say that about any race.
Yeah.
They established newspapers, magazines,
I know.
as well as
Like,
TV and radio stations. What else are you gonna say? They bought a house.
I know. Like, considering the fact that in Canada, the Philippines is like the number 3 country of where immigrants come from, like, why is there such a lack of history within the Philippines and Canada if we're so high on like the immigrant list, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I don't personally feel this way, but I think that the reason why the government speaks so little on like Filipino-Canadian history and also Asian Canadian history in general,
Yeah.
is because as much as possible they want to downplay everything.
Yeah.
Because here, well, you guys, listeners can't see the list because this is our script.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to look at our script. Top secret information. Uh, there's a lot more Chinese Canadian history here than there is Filipino Canadian history. And I think the reason why is because after they wrote about the Chinese railroad workers, so many other things are tied with that, so they realize like, oh no,
Yeah.
I can't not bring this up because now
Yeah.
it's just, if they could, I think they would press a button just to erase everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If the what is it called, Men in Black, the pen thing that they have, if they could, they would. Let's be real here. And that doesn't just go for Canada.
Yeah.
United States, other countries with history like this, if they could, they would, and we know that. Let's be real here. Okay, our first piece of history dates back to 1788. Ooh. And it's about trading back in BC and how Chinese Canadian had a role to play in that. So, in May of 1788, Captain John Meares, I think that's how you pronounce that. Meares.
I think so.
It's either Meares or Mears. He is a British fur trader, so I'm gonna assume that it's Mears. I feel like that's how I would say it. Arrived at Nooska Sound on Vancouver Island with 50 Chinese artists who helped build a trading post. The year after that, an additional 70 came to help build a fort and a schooner. And with the discovery of gold in BC in 1858, immigrants from San Francisco also came to the Fraser River Valley. Later on, Barkerville, British Columbia was established as the first Chinese community in Canada, which I think kind of makes, yes, hey. And it kind of makes sense because if you think about it, it's BC and then Ontario. Those are the two very, well, I don't want to say Ontario. I guess it's more Vancouver and then Toronto. But
Yeah.
those two places are heavily populated with Chinese people.
Mm.
And when I was little, I thought that it was just because Vancouver and like BC in general was close to Hong Kong and to Japan and everything, which is part of it, but there's more to it.
Yeah.
And if we hadn't done research and tried to learn about this, we wouldn't know. Now, moving on, we have the Chinese railroad workers, which I talked about earlier in the assignment, but I'm going to touch on a little bit more now because we need to learn about this. And if you don't want to, too bad.
Why are you listening if you don't want to?
Yeah, exactly. In 1881 to 1884, over 17,000 Chinese workers came to Canada to build and maintain the Canadian Pacific Railway. Thousands came from the coastal areas of the United States where they had already helped to build the American Transcontinental Railroad, but the majority came directly from southern China. Little point here, whenever we learned about this or it was brought up, there's always one person that asks me what I know about it because they think that I have a family member that was a railroad.
Oh my god.
They that reminds me of those shirts that are like, ask me about my shirt or ask me about this, ask me about my. I'm not doing that. Sorry. Where was I? Okay, BC already had a really large Canadian population, a really large Chinese population, and racism towards Chinese people was already a huge thing back then, which is another thing. And this is the thing that pisses me off about Canada.ca. When I was looking this up, they said media of the time often portrayed the Chinese cultural practices such as dress, living conditions, and even funeral rites in a degrading way.
So sugar-coated.
Why? What did you just say?
Just say it.
You called us rats.
Yeah.
I was gonna say move on, but that's not what I meant. Get over yourself. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of information that's hidden about this pertaining to the death that happened because there were a lot of Chinese workers that would be told to plant bombs. Well, yeah, I guess you call them bombs so that they could like break openings and continue railway. And a lot of people died from doing that because, well, bombs explode. Easiest way to put it. And they would always hide that because like, things happen. What about it? And I mean, you could easily, I'm not saying that you should, but you can easily hide the death of I can't say this word, can I? You can easily hide the death of railroad workers just by, hiding them in nearby forests or something, which is very dark. But I mean, that's probably what they did. They've never been exposed for doing that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Anyways, following that, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, also known as the Chinese Immigration Act of 1885, but we're going to call it Chinese Exclusion Act because we're calling it as it is.
Yeah.
So originally they put a $50 head tax on every Chinese person trying to immigrate, but then later on, in order to keep people from coming, keep Chinese people from coming, they raised it to $100 in 1900, and then in 1903 they raised it to $500 to make it even more difficult for Chinese people to immigrate, which Also, this is a small thing. It plays into the model minority thing with only successful Chinese people could come, only rich people could come, because who else could cover $500 Canadian during that time, right? Additionally, the Electoral Franchise Act at the same year disenfranchised all Chinese immigrants, making them ineligible to vote in federal elections.
Also, despite the head tax, Chinese immigrants continued to come to Canada, and in 1923, the Canadian Parliament passed the Chinese Immigration Act, aka the Chinese Exclusion Act, on July 1st. The Chinese Canadian community called it the Humiliation Day. Or Humiliation Day, not the. And the Chinese Immigration Act in 1923 was repealed in 1947. During the years the act was enforced, fewer than 50 Chinese people were allowed to come into Canada. And so the House of Commons, I guess, gave an apologies, quote unquote, which, we know how that goes. But on June 22nd, 2006, the Government of Canada apologized in the House of Commons to head taxpayers, their families, and the Chinese community.
It started in 1885, and they apologized in 2006.
Which was 14 years ago. And how long ago was 1885?
Hello?
Hello?
Rian.
Wait, you can't hear me? No!
Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay,
You're
okay.
back. You're back.
Oh my god.
What was the last thing that you said? You said how long ago was 1885? If we're talking about from a time span from 2006 to 1885, that's 121 years ago. Well, from 2006.
Ugh. Well,
and if we were to do 2020 to 1885, that's 135 years ago.
Yep.
Imagine taking that long.
Canada has a history of doing this also, and people always paint Canada to be like this safe space, which it's not. But yeah. Do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Another thing that Canadian history that we were not taught about was the Montreal Chinese Hospital. The Montreal Chinese Hospital began in 1918. Mother Mary of the Holy Spirit of the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception set up a temporary facility to meet the medical needs of the Chinese community during the influenza epidemic.
You say that 5 times fast.
I know. That's a long Mother Mary of the Holy Spirit of the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception. Okay. So a year later, the Chinese community, with support from the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception, acquired a former synagogue. Yes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my God, this is so much reading, and I can't speak. Acquired a former synagogue and converted it into a hospital, which officially opened in 1920. And by 1962, the hospital building had become outdated, and following a successful fundraising campaign, a new facility was opened in 1965. In 1971, the Montreal Chinese Hospital became public and served as a long-term hospital with an outpatient clinic offering a variety of medical services. In 1999, the Montreal Chinese Hospital opened its current 128-bed hospital, which offers services that are particularly adapted to people with Chinese or Southeast Asian backgrounds.
Hey.
Which we had this whole section on like the pandemic back then, like when we were in history, and we did not learn about any of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is in no way me defending what happened, but I feel like teachers, they're very uncomfortable talking about things like this.
Yeah.
Especially white teachers.
Yeah.
I feel like they have a hard time figuring out how to sound like they're against this or they're like above this, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because very small random side tangent. When we're doing the blanket exercise, for visual arts class because we have a unit on indigenous art. My teacher, white man by the way, started crying.
He started crying?
Yeah, he started crying. A lot of people started crying.
Yeah.
Next, we have Chinatown, everyone's favorite thing that unfortunately has very sad history.
Now, okay, can I just say now it's like cool for people to be going to Chinatown and stuff?
Right?
People,
Right?
it's white people, you know?
Yeah, like, oh, we're going to Chinatown, go to a thrift shop.
We're gonna go eat a juicy dumpling in Chinatown. Take pictures in front of all the ethnic things and then have like some random text and oh my god. I'm not calling anyone out.
What are you talking about?
What are we talking about? What
The
episode is
dark
it?
history behind Chinatown. Since the beginning of the 20th century, Chinese Canadians mainly settled in very large cities and urban areas in general. And Chinatowns were developed in the 19th and 20th century to serve as hubs for business and family life for Chinese people. And then, God, when we were doing research for this, and we stumbled upon Canada.ca, they said, unfortunately, well into the 1930s,
Oh god.
restrictive legislation in some cities inhibited Canadians of Chinese origin from investing in properties outside of the Chinatown area. What do you mean, unfortunately? You say that like it was out of your control. You just That reminds me of the climate march when people were talking about why Justin Trudeau's social media post where he's like,
Yeah.
today march for.
It's like, bro, you're literally the guy in charge.
But yeah, next time you stroll into Chinatown, think about it. Like I mentioned before, in 1885, there was an act that was placed that disenfranchised all Chinese immigrants. Well, throughout the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, most Asian Canadians were denied the right to vote in federal and provincial elections. While the Federal Electoral Franchise Act, which is the act that I mentioned earlier, denied Chinese Canadians the right to vote, a new legislation in 1898 permitted other Asian Canadians to vote, which great job on pitting people against each other. In 1920, the Dominion Elections Act took federal voting rights away from individuals who were denied provincial voting rights because of their race. Very cool. And then as a result, people of Chinese, Japanese, and South Asian origin in British Columbia were denied the right to vote completely. And then in Saskatchewan, Chinese people were disenfranchised. In 1948, this section of the Dominion Elections Act was repealed, and then the year after that, the change came into effect, and Japanese Canadians regained the right to live anywhere in Canada. That same year, the Provincial Election Act was amended in British Columbia to allow all racial groups, excluding Dao Cobras, to vote provincially. Now, if you're wondering what that is, it's a spiritual Christian religious group of Russian origin. I feel like very specific.
Yeah. Well, honestly, learning, like researching about this stuff, we've already learned 10 times more than we did in school.
Yes, that's that's an understatement, to be honest.
Yeah, it really is. Like, we'd learned about the Chinese Exclusion Act briefly and Japanese internment camps, but that was really it.
Yeah, and when we got assignments for stuff like this, our quote unquote research assignments, they were just POV, as Rihanna would put it, a POV letter.
Yeah. Right in the point of view of insert racially oppressed group here.
Oh my god, I just remembered. One time on social media, well, I mean, this could have been fake, but it also could have been real. Someone said that they had an assignment where they had to write in the point of view of a slave.
Oh
in
my
America.
god. Wait, I think I remember you seeing this.
Why there are other ways to teach people things.
I know. So unnecessary.
Well, if you listen for this long, you get nothing but a good education.
Yay.
Yay.
Congratulations. You are more educated than most Canadian teenagers.
Well, thanks for tuning in today. Leave a comment about something you learned from this episode. Talk about your experience learning about Asian history in Canada, in America, because, I mean, we have a decent amount of people listening to us from the U.S.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you learned, didn't learn, what you wish to do.
Yeah.
Rant about a teacher. I love reading those.
So if you want to find out more about us, check out the card link in our Instagram bio. It contains links to our streaming platforms such as Spotify, Anchor, and more. Follow us for more behind-the-scenes content, announcements, and other random things we decide to put on there.
See you next time.
Bye!